Hi everyone, welcome to Caravan of Consciousness. This is episode number 6, and today I've got my long-standing friend for the last few years, Mike Williams. Mike is a researcher and a documentary maker. He studies subjects involving the nature of the music industry, particularly the Beatles construct and the Paul is dead subject in all its various forms. As well as the social engineering side of things like the Tavistock Institute and other cultural creation entities that have broken down family values and morals and redirected society's trajectory. Mike also studies within all that occultism and symbolism. He's also an accomplished singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and has produced 2 albums, Leaving Dystopia and Hollow Moon, and I believe he is now working on a 3rd album. Welcome, Mike.
Amanda, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, it's been a long time coming and we're finally doing it. So, like I said before we started recording, it's probably getting a little bit monotonous for you to repeat the same things. But just for my listening audience that may not know about you or haven't followed your work, first of all, I'd like to ask you, when did your awakening journey start? Like, when did you first realize that the nature of our reality is not what we grew up believing it was?
Well, I've always known that there was an aspect of our reality that wasn't as I was being told and taught. And that's because at a young age, I had a lot of paranormal experiences. And because of that, I knew that there was something else going on, even when adults were telling you that it's your imagination or, that didn't happen. you know, you're thinking, well, yeah, actually, it did happen. And so I did. I had a lot of paranormal experiences growing up. And then in 2009, I had it's going to sound crazy, but I literally had a vision. And I had it when I was lying in bed, I wasn't asleep. And to make a long story short, I had this vision. And in that vision, my spirit guide had come to me. And at the time, I didn't know it was my spirit guide. And he had just said to me, "It's time." And I'm thinking, well, time for what? And he just said, "It's time." And then, as quickly as he came, he pulled back. And I saw his face, Amanda, just like I'm seeing you or anybody else in the physical world, clear as day. So it wasn't my imagination. I wasn't dreaming. It was an actual event that took place. And also, when it happened, there was this euphoric feeling that went right through my body. And it was just total unconditional love. And I knew at that point that something very significant had happened. Now, I didn't know what it was going to mean, but what happened soon after that event was a lot of things in my life changed. So at the time, I was in the corporate world. I spent over 30 years in that environment. And I ended up wrapping it up within 5 years. I got into hypnosis. I was actually a board certified hypnotherapist with the International Association of Counselors and Therapists. And I did that for 12 years. And as we were talking before we got started here, I retired back last September, September 1st. I retired the practice, but I helped a lot of people, hundreds of people over the years. As I mentioned, half my practice was clinical work, and the other half was spiritually oriented, past life regression, between lives, and those types of sessions. So my awakening actually took place in 2009, and it was a spiritual awakening. That's what shook me. Before that, even though I had the paranormal experiences, I was still on the hamster wheel, the matrix, and everything changed
Yeah,
back in '09.
yeah. And with the spiritual awakening, did you start to connect the dots about sort of things in society not adding up, or was it more that you were just looking at it from a spiritual perspective? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
did things come into your sort of field about sort of like the media or the banking system or things like that? Or was it coming from a higher perspective?
it was coming from a higher perspective.
Yeah.
So it was a spiritual connection first. And at the time, I just I couldn't get enough of reading metaphysical material.
Yeah.
And what had happened was back earlier in 2009, I read a book. I was always fascinated by near death experience. And I was always looking for good documentaries, good books on it, because I just found it fascinating. And so I was on Amazon and I was looking for books on NDE. And Amazon said, "Hey, you might like this book." And it was Memories of the Afterlife. It's a book by Michael Newton. And I didn't have any idea who Michael Newton was. And it was a pre-order, so the book wasn't ready yet. And so I read the little blurb on it, and it was about past lives and reincarnation. And I thought it was interesting. So I just ordered the book. And when I got it, I think it was 30 something case studies by people who were doing the work that I ended up doing, who were connected into the Newton Institute. And I was just blown away by what was in the book. And after I got done reading it, I think it took me about 3 nights of reading it. I just plowed right through it. I decided that I wanted to go get my own past life session. And I wound up going out to Wilmington, North Carolina. That's where well, she ended up being, Brand ended up being my colleague. We actually worked together between training and instructing for almost 10 years. And that's where I had my sessions. I had a past life regression on a Thursday, and I stayed over in Wilmington because that's about 2 hours from where I live in Raleigh. And the next day I had a between live session. And it was a game changer, total game changer. So after having the experiences, I drove home and I thought I have to do this work. It's very, very important because it's work that's going to not only benefit me personally, but I'm going to be able to help a lot of other people to awaken and to help improve their lives, whether it be through spiritual sessions or through clinical hypnosis. And so that's where it came from. First, it was all spiritual. And it was kind of like my divine had set the table. And
Yeah.
they were telling me, hey, you know what? You have to get this down first. Get
Yeah.
this down first because this is the most important. Because what I didn't know at the time, but which I found out in short order, is we are in a spiritual battle.
Hmm.
So if you don't have that spiritual connection or that spiritual understanding, then yeah, you could still do the battle, but I don't think that you have all the ammunition you really need.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Because having that higher level of awareness and of the bigger picture and of just that spiritual foundation gives you a level of fearlessness
Hmm. Yeah.
because you realize that this is not everything. This is not all of it. And there's a much bigger picture in play. And that is what you're in support of. You're in support of that bigger picture and trying to bring the masses together and get them to move off the dime.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, when we come from the spiritual perspective, we can connect with our guides and the angels and archangels and things like that. Whereas people that aren't necessarily on the spiritual path, they might still be doing a lot of the work and trying to fight this spiritual battle. But because they're coming in from the just the physical perspective, they probably feel overwhelmed at times. They're probably
Right.
not protecting themselves enough and are getting hit with not just EMFs and things like that, but also other negative energies and entities and things around them. Whereas when you have that knowledge and that sort of higher view of things, you've got more to pull into your little tool bag to help. So yeah. So I guess you would have read Robert Monroe's books too, would you? That guy in the, I think he was in the 70s and early
Yeah, I didn't read
80s.
Robert's books. I read Michael Newton's books. I read a bunch of Brian Weiss's books. Um, maybe I did read one of Robert's books now that I think about it. I had so many books, Amanda, when I got into this
Yeah.
that they just piled up and I was just plowing through them.
Yeah, I was lucky because mum was right into this sort of stuff. And I can remember even as a child, and like sort of pre-teen and then going into my teens reading all these sorts of things. Mum had books like Life Before Life, Life After Death, Life Between Lives. She had some Robert
Hmm.
Monroe ones. She had some Seth, Jane Roberts books, the readings of Seth and things like that. So I actually had a good foundation of spiritual knowledge right from being young. But like you, I was also still stuck in the matrix in other ways, like I didn't realize until probably around, I think it was around 2009 or 10, maybe, around the Zeitgeist movie when that first came out.
Yeah, I
Because I
remember
had
that.
I
Yep.
had a friend put me on to that, and that's when my eyes just really opened up to everything, banking systems, religious indoctrination, social engineering, pretty much everything, every aspect of our lives is controlled. So I sort of came in from about then up to now, whereas a lot of people have really only woken up in the last 2 to 3 years, really,
Yeah.
with what's gone on since 2020. And I know
Yeah.
going back a few years, even in the 90s, I was right into like um, Louise Hay, Dr. Wayne Dyer, um, I think it's Mike Brady and all those people, and the guy Bruce Lipton that talks about epigenetics and things like that. So
Yes.
I
Yes.
had all that sort of stuff there. Um, but when they were sort of talking about this great awakening and we're going into this, human consciousness is rising and we're going into this other sort of dimension and on a higher level, I still couldn't put my head around how it was going to happen. And it's totally not what I thought it was going to be. When 2020 hit, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that it was going to be like this. But it's been, yeah, really, really strange seeing people that I thought would never ever be able to talk about things that I've been talking about for years and years. Now I'm finally having those conversations with people. There's still a lot of people, obviously, that are walking around with the blinkers on, but so many more people have woken up. Have you found that in your circle of friends and associates and family, that more and more people are awake now in the last 3 years?
Yeah. I'm finding that I don't want to say that people are like awake. What I'm finding is that there's an awareness. There's more of an awareness. So you have to be aware first before you can become what
Yeah,
we call quote awake, right?
yeah,
So yes, so I'm finding a lot more people now are becoming aware that something is very, very wrong with the world.
yeah,
And all you need to do is to take a look around you on any given day. And it's as if we live in a comic book, like a cartoon.
mm-hmm,
Nothing makes any sense.
yeah,
And everything is upside down. And it's amazing to me how people that can't see that they can't see it. It really does fascinate me that they can't sense that what's going on around them is not a good thing. And
yeah,
it's like I said, it's upside down. But but there are a lot of people that have become aware and they're starting to question a lot of things, whether it be medical, the government, politics, the military, the education system, whatever it may be. They are now looking at it and questioning it, which is what we need to do.
yeah,
Question everything.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, um, getting into your research that you've been doing the last few years, how did you actually start on that path, on that journey with getting into the Beatles conspiracy and things
Yeah.
like that? Yeah,
Yeah, it's not something I ever thought that I would get into. I was born and raised on Long Island in New York, and going back to when I was 9 years old, I was begging my father to take me to the movie theater to go see Yellow Submarine. So I was 9 years old, and I was a little Beatle freak at that age. And so he took my brother and I. I know it was very painful for Dad,
Yeah.
but that was not his thing.
Yeah.
And so I was a big Beatle freak, fanatic my whole life, and I have a record collection, Amanda, of Beatle records, 33 RPM and 45s that would rival anybody's collection of Beatle vinyl. I have their albums from across the world. Uh, some of the albums that I have are extremely collectible, and that's because I was collecting them over many years. And you can see even behind me, you probably can't see too much, but or you can't see it there. But on the other side of the shelving, I have a lot of Beatles types of memorabilia and so on. I've gotten rid of a lot of it over time, especially since I got into the research back in 2016. But so the point I'm making is, I love the Beatles. The Beatles were the reason why I got into music, why I played guitar, why I started writing music, why I decided to record, and all that. And but back in 2016, this is one of those things where you're not really quite sure how it happened. It's just this fuzziness and vagueness with regard to memory. But I was looking for books, and again, I was on Amazon looking for whatever I was looking for to read, and then the Memoirs of Billy Shears pops up. And it was the 2009 version. The '09 version is the first edition of the book. It's the red cover for those that are who are just wondering. There's a blue cover now. That's the later edition. And I read the little synopsis about it, and I thought, well, yeah, this looks kind of interesting. So let me buy this book and let's see what this is all about. So, I sat down, I read the book. It's 666 pages. Yes, it's a
Yep.
lot of occultism tied to it. There's a lot
Yep.
of occultism tied to the Beatles. And after I read the book, I was just, I was just couldn't believe what I was reading, and I was
Because
thinking
you
to myself,
you would have, sorry for butting in here, but you would have already have known or heard about the Paul is dead
"Oh yeah,
from,
yeah,
because I remember hearing about that way back in the
oh
70s.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah." So I
Yeah.
knew about the Paul is dead rumor, but
Yeah.
I chalked it up as basically, a very clever, witty marketing ploy that the Beatles put in
Publicity
play.
stunt. Yeah,
Publicity stunt, yeah,
that's what I thought too. Yeah.
yeah. In fact, I remember Sophia Smallstorm sending me an email going back before we did our show in 2016 about um, Paul McCartney being swapped out, and I said, "Nah, don't believe that." I literally wrote back,
Yeah.
"Don't believe that. It's a bunch of hogwash."
Yeah.
And in fact, back when I was in high school, I think it was around 1976 or so. I think I was a junior in high school. I had put together a little class, a little lecture. I brought my friend's older brother in. His name was Doug, and Doug was about 4 or 5 years older than us, and he knew all of the clues on all of the Beatle albums. The play the records backwards and all that stuff. So my high school at the time was very progressive, and so they allowed the students to bring in guest speakers. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to bring Doug in because I found the clues fascinating, even though I didn't believe that Paul McCartney was actually replaced. I found the whole premise and the clues fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? So, Doug came in, and he did his pitch, and I never expected the whole room to be standing room only, because I remember before that I was putting little flyers up thinking, I
Everybody
hope somebody.
loves everybody loves a mystery.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, well, I hope somebody comes
Yeah.
to my little thing here.
Yeah.
And so by the time we got going and Doug was there, the room was packed, and he was going through all the albums, and he was playing the records backwards, and it was just fascinating. So I knew all about it. But then when I bought the book in '09, excuse me, 2016, the '09 edition of the book, it was a lot more than just replacing Paul McCartney. It was just about how the Beatles were a psychological operation, a PSYOP, a social engineering initiative created by Tavistock, who reports in under the Committee of 300. And I was just, okay, this is a lot to take in. And so what I did was I decided that I was just going to start researching the book. And because it's classified as historical fiction, and the reason why it's classified that way is because there are non-disclosures and secrecy agreements that Billy, by the way, when I say Billy, folks, it's Billy Shears, also known as Paul McCartney, that Billy has signed, and also Thomas Hugh Harriet. Tom is the author / encoder of the book, and I can get into why they call him the encoder in a bit. And he also had a signed non-disclosure. So anybody who's tied into the book has NDAs and secrecy agreements. And so putting out a nonfiction book would be extremely problematic because it would be breach of contract. And there would be very significant legal implications if anybody breached those contracts. So nonfiction. So nonfiction means historical fiction means that the book has threads of fiction throughout it. And it's up to the person who's reading the book to learn to decipher and decode what is truthful and what is not.
Yep.
Right. So that's how I got into it. And then I remember reading the book, and I said, I was talking to Sophia Smallstorm, and I said to Sophia, we were on a Skype call or something, and I said, hey, I'm reading this book. It's crazy stuff. And I was telling her about it because she says, were you the one that wrote me an email and said that Paul McCartney's always been Paul McCartney?
Yeah,
I said,
she
okay,
would. She'd be giving it to you.
I'm like, okay, just get rid of that email, right? Things change.
Yeah.
So anyway, she said, well, you have to come on the show, her podcast, and talk about it. And I said, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Because it was 666 pages. So, the first order of business is, how do you take that much material and kind of funnel it down to something that you can present in an hour, a half, or 2 hours? And so I kind of put it off. So I said, okay, let me look at it. And then I would pray that she wouldn't ask me again, But that's not Sophia. So she decided that
she's pretty persistent.
so periodically, like every 2 weeks or so, she would ask me about the book and, do you want to come on the show to do it? So finally I said, okay. So I did the work to boil the 666 pages down to the highlighted portions of the book that I felt were important to talk about. And that was back in September of 2016. And I thought that would be the only show I was going to do on it. I honestly didn't think that there was going to be a demand to hear any more than that. And I wasn't even sure that I wanted to do it, because I thought to myself, do I really want to tie myself up to be like the quote Paul is dead guy,
Yeah.
And then I got an email from Mark Devlin. And, Mark emailed me. He says, Mike, I just listened to the show you did with Sophia. I'm like, oh no. And
of all people.
I love Mark, but
yeah, I know, but he's really going to take you to task now, isn't he?
Yeah, no, it was fine. It was fine.
Yeah.
So when I said to Mark, yeah, I'll come on and do the show. And it's so funny. If you go back and listen to that show, I'm pretty sure it was that show. It was the second one. I said to Mark that I'm not going to do any more shows after this one on this topic. It's like famous last words.
Yeah,
it's comical.
Yeah.
So I did the show with Mark, and then I tried to get Tom Hugh Harriet on my show to talk about the book. And initially, Tom said he could do it. And then about a week later, we connected, and he said, I can't do it, Mike. I can't go on any shows. So I think what happened, and Tom didn't say this, but I'm pretty sure this is what happened. He went back and said, hey, I can promote the book.
Yeah.
I can do the podcast circuit. I can go on Mike's show. And I think he was told by legal counsel, don't do that, because you don't know what it is you might say that's going to be a problem with the non-disclosure that you sign. So the best thing for you to do.
It could have even been above the legal counsel. It could have been in Billy's camp that told
Absolutely.
him. Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't do it, because you just don't know how you can get yourself caught up in something, So anyway, that was it. And but it intrigued me so much that I decided to continue to do the work. And I was, looking at all kinds of stuff, and my hard drive was filled with folders on the Beatles and Paul McCartney and all that. And what happened over time was, as I was doing presentations and I was putting them out there were other folks that contacted me, and they were doing their own research, or they were interested in my research, and it got them to do the research. It was a combination of two camps. And so what ended up happening was there was about a half a dozen of us that were loosely networked together. And we were just sharing thoughts and ideas and speculation and hypothesis and theories. So we were doing all of that. And so over time, it just kind of evolved and it gelled. And the research got more and more definitive, more concrete, to the point where, at least from my perspective, I feel very comfortable that what I have put out, my body of work, with the help of my colleagues, I stand by it 100%. Did we get everything right? No, nobody's going to get everything right. But what I tell folks is, when the smoke clears, I'm going to be far more right than I was wrong. And I'm not saying that because I'm patting myself on the back. It's because I know the level of work and research that went in behind the presentations
Yeah,
that we put out.
exactly. Yeah.
You
And
know?
there's definitely a lot more to it. It's like recently I watched the Crow 777. I always tune into the Crow 777 podcast, and they did the Moon Manson Woodstock, unraveling all the threads there. And I
Yeah.
actually said on their chat that it's like a jumper. It's like someone's knitted a sweater, and then Crow and Jason have come along and pulled a thread, and then the jumper's just unraveling. And it's like you with the whole Beatles thing, because initially it was just the one thing, was Paul swapped out? Did the original Paul die in 1966 and was replaced and blah blah blah? But after a while, there was all these other things coming into it, wasn't there? There's a lot more to it. We started to realize that the Beatles were actually a construct. They were part of the social engineering from the Tavistock Institute, so they weren't organically, put together or got together,
Right.
sort of thing. You've got that aspect of it. You've got the fact, another big revelation was, did they write all their own songs? And then we've even had more revelations with regards to the person that's playing Paul McCartney now, that you might want to get into with your recent research that your friend has done regarding the eye and things like that. So, yeah, did you want to talk a little bit about some of those aspects of the research?
Yeah. So that's exactly how it worked, Amanda. It was basically a step approach. So the first step is to take a look at, was he swapped out? Is he a different guy? So, and once you do the work and you approach it objectively and with a critical mind, he was swapped out. And then it moves to, the next level. Why was it done? What's
Yeah,
going on here? And that's when you get into the whole social engineering aspect of it. And yes, they were a creation of Tavistock, as was the Rolling Stones, as was the entire British invasion, as is all of the genre of music that has followed. All of it is manufactured. All of it is music is the big tool in the controller's toolbox. That and Hollywood. The entertainment industry is used to manipulate, plain and simple.
yeah, exactly.
So you get to that, and then, once you get through the social engineering aspect of it, then you find out that there's all of this occultism tied to it, primarily through Aleister Crowley. And then you realize, and as you're doing the research, that the the controllers that reside within what I refer to as the pyramid of power, they are um, adherents to Crowley's religion of Thelema. And Thelema means will, do
Yeah,
as thou wilt.
yeah,
And and it all goes back, for them, it goes back to the ancient Egyptian mysteries. And I concluded that with the controllers, the Egyptian mysteries is their spiritual and their religious foundation. They are Egyptian mystery fundamentalists,
Yeah.
zealots,
Yeah. And
and everything goes back to that.
wasn't the last McCartney slash Billy album, wasn't that called Egypt Station?
The 2 albums ago, Egypt Station.
Oh yeah, yeah.
2 albums ago, Egypt Station, and so it goes back. It goes back to Egypt, and so some folks will ask, "Well, what about Babylon? What about Rome? What about?" It's all in there, but they bring it back to Egypt
Yeah.
because that is their their spiritual and religious foundation. That's
Yeah.
where their ideology resides. Um, right now, what we're going through is Crowley's Eon of Horus.
Yeah.
That's what we're going through right now, and it overlaps with the Age of Aquarius. Crowley's Eon of Osiris was uh, the Piscean Age.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have an exact overlap time wise, but it's pretty much there.
Yeah.
And before that, it was the Eon of Isis. And so Crowley explained, or his teachings, that the Eon of Osiris was a very oppressive period of time, a very oppressive age, where humans were not allowed to be enlightened, illuminated. They will never unshackle if the current system continues to be in place. And so the old system, or the age of Pisces, or the Eon of Osiris, needs to be dismantled, needs to be taken down, and start with the new. And the new would be the age of Aquarius, the Eon of Horus. That's where we get the phoenix rising. The phoenix is representative of Lucifer. And so what's going on is all based upon Crowleyism. It's all based upon his principles, his tenets, his religion, which in my mind is kind of crazy, right? Because we have this one person, and for all intents and purposes, the way I see it, the pyramid of power has put all their eggs in his basket.
Yeah.
So he had a belief system, he had a philosophy, he had an ideology, he had a spirituality that uh, the majority of the controllers that they subscribe to. And the way they go about their changes, the way they take down the old age, it's not by a natural order, it's not by a natural means, it's through alchemical stages. So that's what we're going through right now. So the stage we're in right now is Negredo. Negredo is when you just take everything down, you break
Mm-hmm.
it down, dismantle it. And in their philosophy and their ideology says that you cannot have any remnants of the old lying around. It's got to be taken out, it's got to be obliterated.
Yeah.
And then you start with the new and you build up from there.
Isn't also
And
one of their tenets order out of chaos?
yes,
So,
yes, right.
which is what we're pretty much in now, is chaos as things are
That's what we're
breaking
going through
down.
now.
Yeah.
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 But the thing that I've concluded, and if there are going to be people that disagree with me, that's fine, but everything that they do is not natural. It's not the natural order. It is, it's constructed, it's manufactured. They believe that they can change things through their occultism, their alchemy, and their magic, that they can actually force the natural order out of the way, that they can override the creator, they can override source, they can override the natural cycles of life by doing what they do with their occultism. So it's not natural. That's the thing that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And when they talk about how things are going to be so grand in the future, they are not speaking to the average person. They are speaking to the adepts and the followers, the congregation of their religion
Mm-hmm.
and their belief system.
Yeah.
In Crowley's book 77, he goes through a whole list of things that sound really great. Man should be able to do this, should be able to do that, should be able to do all these things, follow his will unencumbered. And then at the very end, Aleister Crowley says, uh, and for anybody who gets in the way of you pursuing your will, you can kill them.
Mm.
And then below that, the rest will be our slaves.
Yep.
See, that's the piece that a lot of people miss.
Yeah.
Basically, what he's saying is we're going to impose our will on you,
Yeah.
on humanity.
So there's a few elites that will be able to do whatever they want
Yes,
and live the best life, and
right.
everyone else, we're just the useless eaters, we're the profane.
Yes.
Yep.
And if you get in the way
Yep.
of us pursuing our will, we will take you out.
Yep.
We can eliminate you. And for those of you that are around, still around, you're our slaves.
Yep.
That's how I interpreted Crowley's book 77. And that's the thing that I have people write me and say, no, 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 Aleister Crowley's philosophy and his ideology is a good thing because it's going to unshackle humanity. And I'm like, look, I read the words, and the words, they look good, okay? But I also understand that he's not talking to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see? So if you think he's talking to you personally, and you think there's salvation in Thelema for the average person, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I did a bit of studies in the 90s. I did esoteric astrology and psychology, and it was through the University of the Seven Rays. And they actually have ties to the Masons, which I didn't realize at the time. Well, I might have known, but I didn't realize what the Masons were fully involved with. And they talk in there about the adepts and the aspirants, um, and then there's all these different levels and the pyramid of power. And
Mm-hmm.
they spoke about the unwashed masses and
The
things like that.
profane.
Yeah, the profane. Yeah. And that's what really opened up my eyes, even back in the 90s to a certain degree. But I still didn't realize, what it was all about and what it was sort of saying until I started researching in the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, the Beatles. The reason why I went through all that, folks, is because the Beatles are, as an entity. I'm not talking about the Beatles individually per se, although if you read memoirs, you pick up pretty quickly that Billy himself is an occultist into mysticism and the esoteric. As an entity, are occulted, and that occultism is Thelema.
Yeah.
It's Aleister Crowley, and Crowley has become a pop icon in pop culture throughout music and Hollywood.
Yeah.
We take a look at all of the symbolism. It's all Egyptian symbolism, one-eyed symbolism, the Eye of Ra, the Eye of Horus, and so on. So this is what's going on, and as I've said, it's not natural. They're forcing it.
Yeah.
It's artificial. So the change and the transformation that they're bringing about is not organic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything they do is not organic.
Yeah. Which, like you were
Right?
saying, goes back to even the bands and things. Nothing happens organically. It's all part of their plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And just as
And
a
in
quick side note there, when you were speaking about Aleister Crowley, because I know I was in contact with you recently. I'm currently reading Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by Dave McGowan. And I
Yeah,
came across in that book that Graham Bond, who was a multi-instrumentalist and tied in with the um, Laurel Canyon sort of crew, it says in that book that he's allegedly a son of Aleister Crowley. And I sent you that photo that I found of him online, and he looks uncannily like Billy Shears. So they are possibly half brothers. And I was wondering how many other half brothers and sisters he's got running around out there. But yeah,
well,
that's just a side. So,
no, it's a good side because in the book, in memoirs, Billy strongly alludes to him being Aleister Crowley being his biological father. It's not written, definitively, but there's enough clues that are dropped in the book where, okay, I think he's telling us that AC was his biological dad. And and some folks will say, well, I don't see his name in Wikipedia under Aleister Crowley's children. I
Yeah.
said, well, you're not going to,
I
okay?
know.
Aleister Crowley
Oh,
was big time into sex magic.
yep.
And so I would guess that there are a number
Yep.
of people out there that were the result of sex magic. Billy, in all likelihood, being one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so there's not going to be a direct tie back to Crowley. Now, the thing with sex magic is children that are conceived from that ritual, they are identified and tapped for a position in life that's going to have a lot of influence
Yep.
and a lot of power. So they are handled and groomed. So if they're born of a sex magic ritual, then they're going to be slotted for big things in their life. And this is what I suspect happened with Billy
Yep.
and
Yep.
others. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
sex magic was Crowley's thing,
Yep.
right? That's pretty
Yeah.
much, I mean, I don't want to, he was known for a lot of things, but sex magic was really at the top of the list of ritual types of endeavors that
Yeah.
he engaged in. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so you came across, okay, so the Paul is dead started the research, and then you found out that the Beatles were actually not organic. Where did you go after that? Like, did you originally, you still thought they wrote all their songs, or how did that come about that you realize that they may not have written? Because actually, before you answer that, I just wanted to say I never understood the Beatlemania, or the fury around the Beatles, about how brilliant they were as songwriters. Because Mum had a lot of Beatles records, and I remember as a young child and toddler, dancing around and singing to Beatles songs. But as I got older, and people that were into the Beatles, like, oh, they're the greatest band that ever, lived, and they were the best songwriters, and they wrote the best, and I never could get that. I thought there's other bands out there that are musically way better, like Led Zeppelin and things like that. I always used to scratch my head. What is it about the Beatles? Why do people think that they were the greatest and best of everything? And it never sat well with me, but obviously I didn't realize at the time that, yeah, they actually weren't the ones writing the songs anyway. But how did you sort of come across the fact that they didn't write all their own songs?
Well, two things happened really. There was a passage in memoirs, and it was on page 350 and 351. And it wasn't a lot of words, and it's going back to a previous edition. And the paragraph I'm going to paraphrase said something to the effect that, and George Martin was going to take their little songs and make them great. And then the next page talked about the Committee of 300 and the snitch. And I thought, the Committee of 300, the snitch. Well, the Committee of 300 was John Coleman, Dr. John Coleman. And so I got the book, The Committee of 300, and read the entire thing. And John Coleman talked about the entire control system. So the Committee of 300 is about 300 individuals that run the world strategically. Like, they get their orders from up above, right?
Yeah.
Whoever the up above is, but think of them as kind of like the 300 people that ensure that whatever decisions are made above them are um, are delegated out to the various international organizations, Tavistock being one of them, to social engineer the world, to put their social engineering initiatives into play. And so Coleman didn't have a lot of passages on the Beatles in the book. The book's about 250 pages or so, but he talked about how they were a creation of Tavistock. Um, but the thing that really got me was I was watching a DVD. It's a series, and the series is titled Deconstructing the Beatles, and under that would be the various albums. So Deconstructing the Beatles, let's talk about Rubber Soul, let's talk about Sergeant Pepper, let's talk about Revolver. And it's just one of those things, it's synchronicity, Amanda, where why did I pick Rubber Soul? Sergeant Pepper was one of my favorite albums, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Abbey Road. I liked Rubber Soul, but it wasn't in my top three.
Yeah.
But I picked Rubber Soul.
Yeah. You were guided to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started watching it, and I've been playing guitar for a long time and writing songs and, in and out of recording studios, especially earlier on in my life. Today, I mean, all of my recording is done in my office. I have a home studio. So I'm watching the DVD, and it's the official narrative that's being presented, and it's saying that the Beatles had just come off their U.S. tour. They were going into the recording session, which went from October 11th of 1965 to November 11th of 1965, 30 days, to write, rehearse, arrange, and record 16 songs in 30 days. So it's 14 for the album, and then there was 2 for a single. And I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking to myself, there's no way that this happened. Mm. There is no way that 16 songs were written in 30 days, especially when the official narrative tells us that they came into the Rubber Soul sessions with no backlog of music.
Yeah. Who comes into a recording studio dry? I mean, that's time that you're eating up.
They had to write from scratch.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
The
Nobody
official
does
narrative,
that.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. The official narrative said basically from scratch. There was like Michelle, they said, the official narrative says there was like little bits of the song, but when all is said and done, they had a blank piece of paper and they had to come up with 16 songs.
Yeah.
And as I was researching it, I concluded that it couldn't have possibly have happened. It couldn't possibly have happened. I mean, can you imagine taking, I don't care how good a songwriter you are, and saying, okay, look, you've got 16 songs to write between now and 30 days out. Get going.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand is the Beatles were on the hook for 2 albums a year contractually. This is the contract that Brian Epstein signed. So 2 albums in 63, 2 albums in 64, 2 albums in 65. And they did the 1 album in 1966, Revolver. So they were operating within very, very strict time constraints. They had to get this done. There was no schedule moving to the right. In other words, delays were not going to be possible.
Yep.
You had to make these dates because in the case of Rubber Soul, they had to wrap up by November 11th because they needed to have Rubber Soul in retail by December 3rd.
Yeah, for Christmas.
For the Christmas season.
Yeah, because didn't they also do a couple of other songs on an EP, was it? In the same
during
session?
That session.
Yeah.
They had to do a flexi disc for Christmas.
That's right, yeah.
They had to do, they got their MBEs. They took a day out to go do that.
Yeah.
They also had 2 days where they were doing a TV special and they weren't in the studio.
Yeah.
So when I did the analysis, for those days where they weren't physically out of the studio, I gave them the benefit of the doubt and said they were just heads down writing songs and trying to crank it. But the problem that most people make whenever they talk about this, and it typically comes from people who are not musicians and songwriters, is when you write a song, you have to rehearse it.
Exactly. And you have to get the other guys rehearsing too, because they're not going to know what's gone on in your head. So you
right.
you have to try and get the bass lines, the drums and the
The guitar
fills and
parts, the
yeah,
vocals, the
yeah,
harmonies,
exactly.
everything,
Yeah.
everything.
I mean, one song could take 30 days.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this was the thing. So people want to just jump from write and record. And the answer is, well, of course they can do it because it was the Beatles. The Beatles can
Yeah.
do anything. The Beatles are magical. And,
Superman.
yes, they have superhuman ability. And
Yeah.
so no discussion.
Yeah.
So don't question it, Mike. It just happened. And but the other problem was, which was a big problem, is if you're writing the songs from scratch, then you don't have the names of the songs yet for the songs you haven't written.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And if you haven't rehearsed the songs completely and gotten them ready to be recorded, you don't know the runtime for those songs. So, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is when you bought a record, the label had the names of the songs, the runtimes of the songs. Well, the label had to get printed. How are
Yeah.
you going to print the label? And how are you going to print the album art if you don't know the names of the songs? If you don't have the sequencing. So the sequencing would be this: George Martin would have the names of the songs and the runtimes. So songs are named, songs are recorded. He knows the song's 2.5 minutes, it's 3 minutes or whatever. Now he sequences, he does the sequencing. The sequencing allows him to determine how many songs are on side A of the vinyl, how many songs are on the B
Yeah.
side.
Exactly. And
Okay.
how much gap you're going to have between each track.
Yes, all of
That
this
sort of thing.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of this has to take place.
Yeah.
So the thing is, with the Beatles Rubber Soul story, they, of the 16 songs, four of them we're told were completed on the very last day, November 11th.
It's
That
laughable.
means,
It's actually laughable now you really think about it, isn't it? But we just lapped it up, didn't we?
yeah. So
Yep.
George Martin didn't have the run times.
Yep.
We could argue maybe he had the names of the songs because they were
Yep.
coming in. Okay, well, this is what I named the song, but he didn't have the run times because they hadn't been recorded yet, and he didn't even know whether they were going to be able to get the recordings completed.
Yep.
Right? I mean, you're hoping that you can get it done, but so no run times. So without that, um, he couldn't do the sequencing yet. He had to do all the mixing, and so on the 17th of November, so the Beatles finished up late in at night. Actually, it went into the early morning hours of November 12th, like 2 a.m. or something like that, if I recall, for those four songs. Then George Martin had to do the final mix, and then the final lacquer had to be cut. And that lacquer wasn't cut until November 17th, almost a week later. So you can't press anything without a final lacquer. And the lacquers have to be tested before you can make them final. It's not like it's just, Shazam and it's just there.
Yep.
So then we're talking about the final lacquer was released on November 17th, and the Beatles had to have, well, EMI had to have the records in retail by December 3rd. That's like, what, 2.5 weeks?
Yep.
How did all the record labels get printed with the names of the songs, with the sequencing? When did all of that take place? It didn't take place from the time they left the studio to December 3rd, because back in the day, too, we didn't have big box outlets, right? Or online stuff to buy our music from. Retail was small record stores.
Yeah. So you
So the
had to.
shipments, so the
Yeah.
whole distribution process took time.
Yep.
There was transportation. And the other thing that a lot of people don't know is back in the day, the way the labels and the album art was done was 4-color printing. Well, a friend of mine who's uh, very knowledgeable in the music industry, he's been in it for decades, said that it took 1 week, Amanda, for the ink to dry
Yep.
on the album art. So that's 1 week that they couldn't do anything as far as packaging anything because, well, the ink had to dry
Yep.
before we can touch the album sleeves
Yeah.
and send
So,
them out and marry them with the records.
yeah. So, what do you think actually happened? Do you think that the musical side of things, the instrumental was already done, the
Yeah.
albums were all
Yeah.
ready, and they just came in and laid down the vocals?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened. So the reason why I took everybody through that is to understand logistically
Yeah.
what was going on,
Yeah. And
right?
how
And
how it's impossible to
it
believe
wasn't
the
possible.
narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, because you would approach it saying, oh, they went in, they wrote, they rehearsed, they arranged, they recorded, they put the record sleeves together, the labels and all that stuff. And you're like, well, hold on a second. There's a lot of problems with that flow, that
Yeah.
process. Okay. So what happened was what I deducted was this. You had to back the process up, right? So in other words, the songs were pre-written by ghostwriters. These would be handpicked songwriters on the EMI/Tavistock staff team that were in all likelihood dedicated to the Beatles and the Beatles only, or predominantly the Beatles.
Yeah.
And those songs were recorded by session musicians, session players. I call it the wrecking crew model.
Yeah.
So so for those of you that don't know what the wrecking crew model is, back in the 1960s and 70s, the wrecking crew in the United States was responsible for a vast majority of the musicianship that was on the pop records that you were listening to. So as an example, it's the wrecking crew on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
Beach Boys didn't play on Pet Sounds. It was the wrecking crew. So that was the model. And
And that
and it wasn't
also
just a,
that also explains why a lot of the bands, when you heard them live, didn't sound anything like they did on the studio
yes.
album.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
that's
I
right.
mean, you're
So
never going to sound exactly the same anyway, even if you did do the studio work. But a lot of them were just way off what you heard on the
yeah,
albums. Yeah.
yeah. So that's what happened. So the songs were pre-written by ghostwriters. The songs were recorded by session players. And this was all being managed by George Martin. Think of George Martin as the managing director of the Beatles. He was the guy that was he was the glue that kept it all together. He was running the show. He was ensuring that the the psychological operation stayed on track. It was like managing a project plan.
Yeah.
And so the Beatles came in between October 11th and November 11th to put the vocals down. So because they had to learn the songs, they had to learn the melodies, they had to learn the harmonies, they had to
Yeah.
do all that. So what they were really doing on that last day, November 11th, and those four songs was they were singing, trying to get the vocal tracks down
Yeah.
for those four songs. And I deducted that this was the model for all of the Beatles records between their first album, the UK release, Please Please Me, and Revolver. And starting in 1967, because that's when Billy was leading the band, because Paul passed away in September of 66, September 11th. This is what Memoirs tells us. Billy took over and Sergeant Pepper was his baby. But even during the 67 through 1970 period, although John and George were writing more of their own material and playing more on the recorded tracks, the Beatles were still utilizing ghostwriters and session players.
Yeah.
And of course, Billy himself was a session musician.
Yeah.
So he knew lots of session players.
Yeah. And since this revelation, we've actually found out that it wasn't just the Beatles either. There was a lot of artists in those days that were doing this. Because I
Yeah.
watched The Wrecking Crew and I watched that other show recently that you
Muscle
were talking.
Shoals,
No, not that one. The other one, Hired
Hired
Gun.
Gun.
Yeah, I haven't watched Muscle Shoals yet, but Hired Gun explains it as well. Going into the 80s, that a lot of people come in and do um, things in the studio and even off stage at live
Yeah.
events. Yeah.
Yes. So with live shows, there are backing tracks
Yeah.
and there are offstage, backstage musicians. And this has been going on forever. It goes on today. In fact, a lot of information is coming out now, like bands like Kiss.
Exactly. And
lip
that was a
syncing.
hard pill for me to swallow because I was a huge Kiss fan when I was in my teens.
Yeah,
And now I just look at them and I just think, oh my God, not only should they not be doing what they're doing because Paul Stanley's voice is completely shot, as is Billy Shear's,
yeah,
by the way. But I understand why they're doing what they're doing because they have to keep doing it because that's the contract that they signed. But
yes.
yeah, but they're actually they just look like clowns now, literally clowns. It's
Yeah,
just
so this goes back, Amanda, you touched on it, right? So um, they have these packs. So if we go back to the example I like to use is Bob Dylan was on 60 Minutes back in, I think it was the early 2000s, and he was talking to Ed Bradley, and Ed Bradley was asking him about his writing his music and why is he still doing it? And, because it's been going on a long time, because Dylan started in the early 1960s. So fast forward 40 years and Ed Bradley's talking to Bob Dylan. That's a long time, 4 decades.
yep,
And in that interview, Dylan said that he has to do it because that's his contract with the chief commander. And that's Dylan actually referred to who he made the pact with as the chief commander.
yep,
So these pacts, even though a lot of people don't want to believe that they take place, they take place.
yeah,
And in fact, in memoirs, it tells us that John and Paul entered into a Faustian bargain in October of 1963,
yep,
and Paul was the ritual sacrifice out of that Faustian bargain, and then John, people could surmise he was taken out in 1980 because of that pact as well. But we have Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. We have John Bonham from Led Zeppelin. We have Keith Moon from The Who.
yep.
We can go
Even
on
over
and on and
here in
on.
Australia, we've got Bon Scott from
On
AC/DC, who was
Scott,
replaced by
the
Brian
27
Johnson.
Club.
Yep, and Michael Hutchence
Mm-hmm.
in excess. Yeah. So although I do think that that might have been with regards to Bob Geldof and the whole Paulie Yates thing as well. But again, it could have been a sacrificial um, sort of satanic type thing
Yeah,
that went on there. And yeah, most bands, most big bands, there's very, very few. The only one I can really think of off the top of my head at the moment is U2 that's still got the original members.
yeah,
But most big bands lose at least one member or a family member very close, like Eric Clapton lost a child, Robert
Connor.
Plant lost a child. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so Billy calls it in the book death for success.
yeah. Because there's no
And
other industry. There's no other industry, no matter what you're doing, whether you're a plumber, a truck driver, a doctor, whatever. There's no other industry that I know of that anyone that rises to the top of their game has so much death around that industry than the entertainment industry.
exactly. It's
Yeah,
very, very dark. And just take a look at these awards shows. Here we had the Super Bowl, the Grammy Awards. It's all dark, satanic, ritual stuff.
yeah,
And if you can't see it, then you're asleep, you know,
yeah,
because it's right there. It's right there. It's rolled up on your doorstep,
yeah.
and
They were hiding it for a long time, but it's not
not
covert
hiding it.
anymore. You know, it's out there. They're yeah.
Yes,
It's like their last desperate I don't know what it is really. It's well, it's I guess they're throwing it in people's faces because it's the time where everyone should be starting to wake up to this sort of thing.
right. And in their minds, I guess they're thinking, well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
What are you going to do about it? I think in their minds, they think that they've gotten to a point where they're not concerned anymore about uprisings and stuff like that.
especially after the 2020 incident. That was a huge gauge as to where people are as far as who's going to rise up and who's just going to take whatever and just sit there eating their popcorn, looking at
I
football.
was I was taken back by it.
Yeah,
I readily admit that when it first came out in March of 2020, I thought, oh, here we go again. Who's going to
yeah,
believe this? Who's going to do that? And then just about, I don't know, 95% of the population decided to just fall in line.
Yeah. It
And,
shocked
when you
me
do
too.
that, when you do that, that all that does is just enable their agenda. You've got to push back. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right, then don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Don't do it, And but in any case, yeah. So that's what happened with the whole Beatle thing. And for me, probably, my legacy as far as the Beatles goes will be, I'm the guy that went out there and said that they didn't write all of their own music and they didn't play on all of their recordings.
Yeah. And have you had anyone from that camp or from anyone that's in the industry actually say to you now that, you've actually stumbled across something that wasn't supposed to get out there, or like, I think, didn't you say recently someone sort of tipped their hat to you and said now that the cat's out of the bag or something?
Yeah. So Bernard Purdie, who was a great session drummer, one of the most recorded drummers uh, in the world, I guess. Back in the late 1970s, he came out and said that he drummed on 21 Beatle tracks, early Beatle tracks. And that's aside from the tracks that he said he fixed that had to do with the Beatles and Tony Sheridan. And that was before the Beatles hit the big time. So he did 21 tracks, Beatle tracks,
Yep.
starting with their first album, Please Please Me in 1963. And Bernard has never come off that. In fact, he published a book in 2014 titled Let the Drums Speak, and he has an entire chapter dedicated to that. So he drummed on 21 songs. So when I did the presentation back in April of 2020, before that, I was dialoguing through email with a lady, and she was out of the UK. And you can tell when you're communicating with somebody that they know a little bit more than what they're letting on,
Yep.
because she had some good information and some very good insights, And so after I published the April 2020 presentation, she wrote me and she said to me, Mike, now that the cat is out of the bag, she said, my relative, I don't want to make the connection because I don't want to cause her any consternation,
Yep.
was Ronnie Verrill. And I'm talking about a very close family connection. Okay.
Yep.
Ronnie Verrill was also a very famous session drummer out of the UK. Bernard was out of the US, and Ronnie was out of the UK. So you could see right away that country boundaries really didn't apply.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they brought in, because they would just ship the tapes. Like in Bernard's case, they shipped the tapes over to the US for Bernard to do the overdubs for the drums. So she said that Ronnie drummed on Beatles songs as well.
Yeah.
So now we have Bernard Purdie saying he drummed on 21 songs. I have now Ronnie Verrill's been dead for a while now, but we have his relative stepping forth and saying that Ronnie drummed on Beatles songs.
Yeah.
The official narrative tells us that George Martin hired Andy White to drum on two Beatles songs that were told, P.S. I Love You and Love Me Do. My take is that I seriously doubt that George Martin only hired Andy White for two songs.
Yeah.
I think Andy White
If
drummed on
he's
a lot
already
more
got him
songs.
there, he may as well utilize it,
Yeah, so
just yeah.
if he's hiring Andy White, that means that Andy White is a go-to person. He's a go-to drummer, right?
Yeah.
That's the way it works. And then in 2000, I think it was in 2004, it was an interview. Bernard Purdie was being interviewed. I think it was a Red Bull sponsored interview or something. And they asked him about it. And to make a long story short, Bernard said that there were four drummers on the Beatles songs. And he's talking about the early period. And he said Ringo was not one of them. I mean, how much clearer does it have to be?
Yeah.
So people will say, well, who are the four drummers, Mike? And I'm like, well, we know Bernard has been saying now for 40 years or so, he drummed on 21. I got verification from Ronnie Verrill's relative that Ronnie drummed on him. We know that Andy White drummed on Beatles songs because the official narrative tells us.
Yep.
And who's the fourth one? I don't know. I mean, I have surmised that it could be a drummer like Hal Blaine from the Wrecking Crew, but it
Yep.
could be any session drummer that that George Martin or but back in the day, 62 to 66, it would have been George Martin
Yep.
would have hired. So that's just the drummers.
Yeah.
In an
Exactly.
interview that Billy did with Bernie Goldberg, going back, I think it's the 1980s, he was asking about some of the stress and the tension between the band, and Billy said that for Sergeant Pepper, he said that George was pretty much a no-show, that he
Hmm.
was putting a pool in or something in his yard.
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, well, George has all kinds of credits on the album for playing guitar here and there and so on. And here's the guy that was really the mastermind of Sergeant Pepper. It was him and George Martin telling us that he wasn't there.
Yep.
And I have another interview with George Harrison where George said that he and Ringo didn't practice. They never practiced. The only time they really did their thing from a guitar perspective or a drumming perspective is when they had to go in and record. Well, that doesn't fly.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
you're not
Yep.
you're not going to reenact your muscle memory during a recording session. That's not going to work.
Yep.
So there's a lot of stuff out there, Amanda, is what I'm saying. And what I like to do is to use the mainstream media's own information to piece it together and say, look, they're telling you,
Yep.
but you don't want to believe it. That's on you.
Yeah, and you can see even in some of their concerts, because I heard recently in one of your interviews that one of the concerts they were starting to play, I can't remember which song it is now, but there was a song
Day tripper.
and Day Tripper, that's it. And that riff at the beginning had started before the guys were even playing their instruments,
Yes,
or they were playing something totally different, or yeah, so
they
you
weren't
actually,
playing.
yeah,
They
so you
were so
actually
day.
see it with your
Yes,
own eyes. But yeah,
yes, it's clear as day. So day tripper starts and they miss their cue,
yep,
and so that's interesting because I had a person write me who is tied into the Beatle machine. I mean, not directly tied into like not in the inner circle, but he has done work uh, related to the Beatles. In fact, he told me that he did some session work for John Lennon
yep,
back during the Apple days. And he wrote me and said that you're right, Mike. He says it happens all the time.
yep,
He told me that he used to do that work, that there would be offstage or backstage musicians that would be playing that the audience didn't see. And that's how a lot of it got done.
yep,
Sometimes it was a mix. I have a friend of mine who's a sound engineer out of Europe, been in the business for a long time, and he explained to me how sound engineers will will mix in what's being played live versus a backing track
yeah.
if they're using a backing track versus live musicians. What folks don't understand is it's a business, it's entertainment, and the entertainment business, whether it be music or Hollywood, it's there to make money,
Yeah, and
and they're
to
putting a product out
brainwash and to warp
and to
minds to,
brainwash,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and
Right.
social engineer. Yeah,
So they're not going to jeopardize their ability to make money. Money is, money is what makes their world go around.
yeah,
It's our spending money on their stuff is what keeps them at the top of their game.
yeah,
That's what people, right? Just buying stuff.
yeah,
It's just the whole consumerism thing. So I know it's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow, but
yeah.
there's a lot to it, and
It certainly
it's
is.
a lot of
Yeah.
deception, a lot of illusion, a
As
lot.
yeah, as Mark Devlin says in his musical truth books, it's time to have no more heroes. And it was hard for me as a music fan and also a musician. I mean, I'm not up to the caliber that you are, but I'm just a three-chord strummer. But I've been in a few bands and I've always been into music and I've got heaps of records and singles and CDs and things. Um, and it's got to the point now where I hardly ever listen to anything that I
Right.
used to absolutely love, even though I can probably still separate myself from the music and what I know about the artist. But even now that I've gone even deeper and found out that probably what you're actually hearing isn't even those guys that you idolized. You don't even know the names or can put a face to the names of any of these people that were playing. So it's almost like it's just, what's the point? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, yeah. So I really like looking at like what you did recently with getting all those songwriters together. The indie guys. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I put together the Great Indie Playlist, and it was 100 artists,
yeah,
100 songs, because the rules were one song per artist.
yeah,
And so, yeah, 100 songs and 6.5 hours of playtime.
yeah, yeah.
That's what you really want to hear, because that's organic music.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
That's real people, real musicians, real songwriters
yeah. Exactly.
putting songs together. And I did one in 2021. Last year I couldn't. I just got tied up in a lot of stuff. I did it this year, and I'm looking to. I'm going to try to do it annually.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's so much out there now. There's so many more people that are coming out of the woodwork that are wanting to put out this um, organic music and this more spiritually awakened type music.
Yeah,
Yeah. But my daughter, she's a singer-songwriter, and I'm so glad she didn't make it big, because she went into heaps of talent shows. She auditioned for like Australia's Got Talent, The X Factor, Time to Shine, a few other things, a few local things. And she always got so down when she didn't get through. And now we know what we know. I'm like, oh my God, you dodged a bullet there. I tell you what, because
yes.
you don't want to get into that world. You're better off just doing your own thing and releasing your music as an independent artist. Yeah, so, but it
My
is,
daughter, the same thing, actually. My daughter has an unbelievable voice. She had formal voice training
yeah,
lessons and stuff like that. And she wanted to do all that stuff too. And
yeah.
thank God she didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also, like all the books, like I've got a bookshelf full of autobiographies and biographies of all these artists that I've followed over the years, anywhere from the Beatles to Guns N' Roses to Prince, the Rolling Stone, everything. Anyone that's sort of in the public arena, I've pretty much got books on them. And I'm just like looking at that bookshelf now, just going, oh
I
my
know.
God, what do I do with them? What, I don't even want to sell them or pass them on to anyone else, because it's all just rubbish. It's like, what do you do? Just have a big book burning, you know?
I know. It
Yeah,
is all rubbish. I feel the same way, Amanda.
yeah,
Like I said, I have still do so much Beatle, merchandise and memorabilia, and I've gotten rid of a lot of it.
yeah,
But I still have to move a lot of it. It does not mean anything to me anymore.
yeah,
I mean, I still have
exactly.
that sign above me there. I got the Abbey Road sign. I think I'm just too lazy to pull the pins out and take it down. But it's just stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
know. And just before we start sort of wrapping up, yeah, we've got a few minutes left.
yeah. Take as much time as you need.
Yeah, yeah, we can maybe go for another 20 minutes or so. That's fine. Um, yeah, getting back to Paul, the latest revelation about the eye. Do you want to
Oh,
talk a little bit about that?
yeah. No, it's a good thing you circled back to that. Otherwise, Sally would have killed me.
Yeah.
So,
She
so
she did some great research. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But
yes,
once you know, you can't unsee it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
no,
It's
no.
right there. Yeah.
So what happened was, so Sally was. We have a private group um, where we would share some ideas, and there's like 3 or 4 of us on that group. And she was putting these pictures up about his eyes, and she was explaining, that his eyes are not aligned and they're out of sync and so on. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, what are you saying? Um, so Sally's like, well, what I'm saying is that he has a prosthetic right eye. He has an artificial eye. Can't see. He's blind in his right eye. Billy
Yep.
is, aka Paul McCartney. So I'm looking at it and I said, okay, you know what? I think you're right. Because once you notice it, like you said, Amanda, once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
Yeah, exactly.
So initially, that was going to be brought into a larger presentation I was going to do with Sally. It had to do with Pan and Frankenstein and all this stuff. Believe it or not, all that stuff is tied in, as crazy as that sounds. And I said to her, no, 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 no. This is a standalone presentation. We can't get this to be lost in the sauce.
Yeah,
This has got to be front and center.
exactly. Because it's such
So
a
we,
huge revelation, isn't it?
yeah. And what happened was Sally caught it because Sally has a prosthetic left eye. She's blind in her left eye. Billy's blind in his right eye. So she's very familiar with the movement or lack of, or how the eyes are oriented and all of this stuff. So what she did, because she didn't want to embarrass Billy. So, because she knows that it's a very sensitive issue, right? It could be very sensitive.
Yeah,
So she wrote Tom and said, look, I know he has an artificial eye. And at first, Tom was kind of like, well, and then finally, she said, I'm paraphrasing here. I know he has an artificial eye.
yeah,
If you don't want me to, or if you don't want us to put it out there, you just let me know. Now, this is her speaking. Okay.
yeah,
I don't know. I may have continued to do it. I mean, he's a public figure. I don't know. But
yeah,
Sally, she was making sure uh, that she was going to be considerate, I should say.
yeah,
And so Tom then said, well, look, just be kind,
yeah,
treat it gently, don't bulldoze through it and stuff like that, which we would never do. It's
yeah,
just not who we are. So that's how it came about. And so we did the presentation, and I did a follow-up myself, only because I was asked, not because Sally didn't want to join the discussion. I always get asked about it, which is a little awkward because I'm not the person that discovered it. I
yeah,
was the person that interviewed the person who discovered it.
yeah,
We just happened to work together, on a periodic basis. But yeah, and there's all kinds of occult connections into Billy being blind in that right eye. We surmise it's possible that the eye was taken during a um, a ritual,
mm-hmm.
because in memoirs he tells us that his earliest recollection of trauma-based mind control goes back to when he was 3.
Yeah,
He also says in the book that he was tutored and mentored by Aleister Crowley, which earlier I said we suspect it might be his biological father,
yeah,
for 10 years. And so Billy was born in 1937. Aleister died in 1947. So there's the 10 years. So, it's possible that Billy may have lost the eye in an accident, but we think that it's more likely that the taking of the eye was part of a ritual
yeah. And it's
ceremony.
it's um amazing too that, well, not amazing, but it lines in with that he can see out of his left eye because he's on the left-hand path.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, right. And he's playing left-handed.
Mm-hmm.
Heather Mills lost her left leg.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of left stuff. Biological Paul was left-handed, and in the book it tells us, and I've done work on this also. I've done a presentation on this, maybe more than one, but um, biological Paul McCartney and Billy are playing out the Osiris Horus ritual.
Yeah. So you got the
Uh,
Eye of Horus. Yeah.
all right. So that's what's Paul represents Osiris, Billy represents Horus, and they're playing out that ritual. And it all ties into what I was talking about earlier about the eon of Horus, Crowley's eon.
Yeah.
So without getting into a lot of that because we were pressed for time, but the the thread of occultism that runs through it is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I don't even pretend to be an expert in this. I know a lot more than I've ever known because of all the work I've done. But Amanda, get emails. I have 3 emails right now from 3 different people who are very, very well versed in the occult. And all of them have told me that I am absolutely on the right path with what it is I'm presenting and talking about.
Yeah.
And right now, I can't show this. I don't want to give this person's email away, but right now, this one here is like a 7 or 8 page, 11-point font document email that was sent to me that I have to read, going into great detail about Crowley and the occultism and the Eon of Horus and all of that stuff. And I've got
Yeah.
2 more like that.
Yeah.
So there are people out there, they know this stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wish that they would step out and present it. But one person told me that they can't do it.
Yeah.
They cannot do it. And it's because the information that they know is information that not a lot of people know. And I'm guessing it probably wouldn't be very difficult to deduct who the candidates might be that are sending that information off to Mike.
Yeah.
You see what I'm
Exactly.
saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
it's crazy. It really is. It's crazy. I never thought I would find myself doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many levels to it, isn't there? Like you were saying, it's not just, and even going back to the book, there's so many levels to that. Like it's got the all the different encoding in it. There's
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a Masonic book.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the first layer is you just read the book. The second layer is the word stacking. So every page of the book has bolded out words. So when you read those bolded out words, they form sentences. So now you get deeper. Then there's the acrostical code. So the first letter of every other sentence, when you read vertically,
Yeah.
um, now you have more information. There's more sentences to decode. Although Tom has put out the acrostical code, it's a small pamphlet where you don't
Which
have to
I
do
wish I
that.
had have known at the time because I bought the 2009
Yeah.
edition and
Oh my God.
I started to do that and it took forever. I didn't get through it, of course.
No, it's
And
labor intensive.
yeah, and then I found out that you can actually get the book that's got that in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
fourth layer is the book is inviting you to go outside the book.
Yeah.
It's dropping breadcrumbs,
To do further
clues
research.
to do further research outside the book, because if it included everything, it would be 6,666 pages,
Yeah.
not 666.
Yeah.
So, and does it have fiction in it? It does have fiction in it. And one of the ways that they embedded the fiction in the book, I actually deducted this and I ran it by Tom and I didn't get no, that's not what we did. So it puts it in the reader's lap to to embrace or not embrace something, to believe it or not believe it. So in
Yeah.
other words, if somebody believes that Aleister Crowley wasn't that important and he was a carnival barker, then the whole piece about the importance of Aleister Crowley becomes fiction to you.
Yeah.
If you believe that Billy did not play the part of Vivian Stanshall in the Bonzo Dog Band with Neil Innes from Ruddle fame, then that part of the book becomes fiction to you.
Yeah.
And of course, if you don't believe that Paul McCartney was swapped out at all, then the entire book
Yeah. So
is
it's
completely fiction.
basically up to the reader's interpretation. So it's very
Yes,
clever. Yeah, the
it's
way they've
very
done it.
clever because they
Yeah.
they knew that there's going to be something in that book, at least one thing for most people where they're going to say, "Oh,
That's a bridge
that's
too far.
ridiculous."
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
fiction. So that's why it's very important to not do that. I
Yeah.
mean, don't get me wrong. I've had my moments like, really? But you have to go out and research it. And that's how you conclude whether it's fiction or not.
Yeah.
You've got to
Exactly.
actually do some legwork. You got to put your head down and do some research.
Yeah. And you said that they've done a few different editions and they've added footnotes and things. Do you think some of that was because of the research that you'd put out there? Do you know that
Yeah,
definitively that they did that and they change, well, not change things, but they actually added things into it in alignment with the stuff that you had actually researched and uncovered?
yeah. So a couple of things happened. So the 2009 version did not have footnotes. So then um, Tom was told or instructed or whatever um, to put another version, a new edition of the book out, and to include footnotes because I had a brief exchange with Tom on this, and evidently Billy was not satisfied with the rate and pace in which the book was being picked up. So, in other words, it was moving slower than they had anticipated. So they put the footnotes in there. And then what happened was when I did my work on the music, on whether they wrote all their own music, I was doing it myself, and I had a small team of 6 other researchers that were paging in and paging out at varying degrees of participation. And when I concluded that the Beatles did not write all of their own music and did not play in all the recorded tracks, after I came out with that, then footnotes were included in memoirs that validated and confirmed my findings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, it was interesting the way that came about because I didn't share any of my information with Tom. I never share my information with anybody other than the people I'm working with.
Yeah,
So, I mean, just to kind of set the record straight, I don't work with Tom. I don't work for Billy. I'm not a Freemason. None of that nonsense. I
yeah,
just do my own thing. And Tom, when I sent Tom I sent him the presentation just as it was uploaded. And he wrote me back and said, "You're going to be very pleased with the next release edition of the book." Because what I didn't know was that he was in the midst of updating, doing another edition. Well, I knew he was doing. I think he was doing another update, but I had no idea what was going to be included in the footnotes. I should say it that way.
yeah,
And so when the book came out, I bought it. I buy the books, by the way, folks. I don't get them for free. I buy them. And lo and behold, the footnotes were there. Basically, not even basically, validating and confirming what I had researched and concluded. They did not write all their own music and they weren't on all the recorded tracks. Tom told me that once something goes out into the public domain and it's truthful, they can expand on it.
yeah,
I don't understand the rule, Amanda. I don't understand why they have that in place,
yeah,
but that's what was explained to me. And the same thing happened with the eye.
yeah,
So when Sally discovered the eye, then what happened was in the release of memoirs that came out soon after we did that presentation, there were footnotes that they didn't say that Billy was blind in his eye, but they were very coy. And if you read between the lines, it was telling you
yeah,
he's blind in his right eye.
yeah, yeah,
So it's stuff like that. And, some people might argue that maybe memoirs is just, Tom is just taking the cue from us, which is not happening.
yeah,
That's not the case at all. Somehow there's this very strange synchronicity that's taking place
yeah,
for reasons that I have to be honest with you, I don't quite understand myself because I look at it as I'm just this guy from Long Island, New York.
yeah,
I came from a blue collar family. My father was a cop, you know.
yeah,
Um, and here I am today. I was a Beatle freak, but hey, what's unusual about that? There's like what, like 5 billion of us on the planet, in the
yeah,
world. I shouldn't say planet, in the world.
Yep.
And and so here I am today, and it's really, it's surreal. It really is.
Yep.
It's weird in a big
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. It's almost like this was what you came to do, on a soul level, in part of the awakening process, in part of making people become more aware of the actual reality of things. And this is your little part in the jigsaw puzzle. But just quickly before we wrap up, I just wanted to say too about the memoirs of Billy Shears, for people that think that it is all fiction, or that it's not, none of this is true. One thing that I've always thought about is, if Thomas E.U. Harriot um, wrote this book, and because they've also got lyrics to songs in the book at the back of the book, he would be charged with all sorts of copyright infringement, and could be sued and roped over the coals for doing what he's done. And also the fact that now, isn't the book um, on the actual Paul McCartney website?
Yeah.
They're
Well,
promoting it?
not McCartney's official website. So real quick, I'll cover. You're on very good points. Number one, Tom would have at least would have received a cease and desist
Yep.
order to stop. He could have been sued for including all of the lyrics that he did in the song. He also probably could have been sued for using Billy's likeness on the back cover,
Yep.
sleeve inside the back cover. So the book is also being co-marketed on, it's called the Memoirs of Paul McCartney.com. It's a site that Tom is responsible for, but on that site, it's marketing both books, the Memoirs of Billy Shears
Yep.
and the Billy's book, the lyrics, 1956 to present. So both those books are side by side on that website.
Yep.
And in Memoirs, it talks about the lyrics, 1956 to present. So the book includes a plug for that book as well. So that book is the book for the profane.
Yep.
I mean, I don't like saying that, but it's for all of the people that want to embrace the Cinderella story, right? So go
Yep.
buy the lyrics, 1950s, 56 to present. Everybody else who wants the real story,
Yep.
read the Memoirs of Billy Shears.
Yep.
But yeah, but there's people that are out there saying that you couldn't get sued for having lyrics in the book, and that's absolutely false. I mean, I checked with two attorneys, and I checked with somebody who is very prominent in the music industry, and I asked him, "Can you just willy nilly just take lyrics and put them in a book? Beatle lyrics, no less, not
Yep.
just any lyrics, but Beatle lyrics." And every one of them came back to me and said, "No, don't do it.
Yep.
Don't do it unless you have permission.
Yep.
And if you don't have permission, you could be looking at a big problem."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for me, that was, I mean, not that I ever doubted the book, because I was already there by the time I read the book. I sort of knew about it and had come to terms with it. But that was the thing that really cemented it for me, was that this book would not be written in the way it's written and with what's in it if it wasn't true, or
Right.
99% of it true. Yeah. So, yeah.
And the book is written for intrepid minds.
Yep.
It's written for people who want to think,
Yep.
who want to investigate, who want to research. It's for people that want to be challenged.
Yep.
That's what the book, I tell people all the time, it's like a big puzzle.
Yeah.
Do you want to do a big puzzle? A lot of people don't like puzzles. No, I hate puzzles.
Yep.
Fine. Then you'll hate the book because it's a big puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to get the updated versions too. And yeah. And and look into that, especially the footnotes. I'll be interested to look at that. So
Yeah.
we're sort of coming to the end of our time today, but I think we've covered pretty much what we wanted to. We might do a part two at some other stage, just touching on some other things as well, if that's all right with you down the track. But I know
I would
you've
love to
got,
talk to you about the spiritual aspects, Amanda,
yeah,
because you and I are
exactly.
really on a same page with a lot of that stuff. I think we can have a great conversation. And to be honest with you, I get beetled out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. That's why I said at the start of this, it's probably a bit monotonous for you rehashing the same things over and over. But I guess as more and more people start waking up to it, I guess you've got to still keep banging the same drum, because then you'll get other people coming on board that don't even know about it, that start to get the little breadcrumbs. So,
Well, I
but
love speaking to people like you because you're a friend. It's good to speak to friends
yeah,
because then you can have a very relaxed conversation,
yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah,
sometimes, I've had offers to go on some of these bigger shows, and um, you're not really sure what their agenda is.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So, I've told some of them no. I said,
yeah.
I'm not going to do it. If you want to know what my position is, go to my YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
And
all
it's not,
there.
like you haven't got you've got so much work there that, yeah, you can just direct people there. So having said that, where can people find you and
Yeah.
your work?
So just go to my hub website, folks. It's Sage of Quay, SAGEOFQUAY, sageofquay.com. It's one stop shop. Everything's there. All of my links, all of my platforms, my music, everything's there. So just go there and you'll find my work.
Yep, great. And your album you're working on now, when do you think that will be out? Have you got a date yet, or are you still sort of in the process of?
I have one more song to record, so it's written.
Yep,
We've just had a lot of stuff to, good stuff with the baby and everything else
yep,
to focus on. So originally I said this spring, but that's not going to happen. Um, since we're pushing March, I would
yep,
say I would say probably mid to late summer.
yep, yep.
And that's
Oh,
when the
that's
third album will come out. I have no idea what the title of the album is,
yep.
but I have 9 songs in the bag, and the 10th one has to be recorded.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, we look forward to that whenever it is.
Well, thank
And I
you.
realize how busy you are. And yeah, because time is just flying by. It's just
It is.
unbelievable. I can't believe we're nearly in March already. So,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really, really enjoyed it. And we definitely will be doing a part two. So, yeah, I'm just so grateful. And I'm so glad that yeah, got to know you all those years ago and have followed your work. And it's just been, yeah, part of my journey too is, starting to pull back from the hero worship that was pretty much throughout all my life with all my music heroes and things. So now I can see, the scales have fallen off the eyes and I can see it for what it is. And I'm so grateful. They say ignorance is bliss, but no, I actually am so glad I know the truth.
No,
So,
knowledge is bliss.
yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right, Mike. So yeah, thank you again so much, and we'll definitely have you back.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda.
Okay, thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.